Let us pause for a moment of silent centering. Please join in singing the ingathering hymn. The words are in your bulletin. The tune can be found on 312 in your hymnal. So, good afternoon on this foggy afternoon, which finds us in the atrium instead of the landmark. And we certainly want to welcome you to First Unitarian Church and Society of Madison. This is a community where the curious seekers gather to explore spiritual, ethical, and social issues in an accepting and nourishing environment. Unitarian Universalism supports the freedom of conscience of each individual as together we seek to be a force for good in the world. My name is Pat Carlson, and on behalf of the congregation, I would like to extend a special welcome to visitors. We are a welcoming congregation, so whoever you are and wherever you happen to be on your life journey, we celebrate your presence among us. Newcomers are encouraged to stay for our fellowship hour after the service and to visit the library, which is directly across the center doors of the auditorium. Bring your drinks and your questions. Members of our staff and lay ministry will be on hand to welcome you. You may also look for persons who are holding teal stoneware coffee mugs. They are FUS members knowledgeable about our faith community who would love to visit with you also. We also want to welcome the children to stay until, I guess, after the message for the service. But if it's difficult for children to be comfortable in this auditorium, we certainly have what's called a child haven and commons in the back, which are an excellent place to retire with children, and you still will be able to hear the service. And speaking of noise, this would be a good time to turn off electronic devices that might cause a disturbance during our hour together. I would like to acknowledge those individuals who are helping with our services to run smoothly. On sound, we have Marian Friend. Paula Appelbach is helping us usher, and you probably met Carol Rome when you came in as our greeter. Please note the announcements that are in your red floors insert in your order of service, which describe the upcoming events at our society and provide more information about this weekend's activities. Again, there's a special couple of announcements I want to share with you. Don't forget to drop off your wrapped, labeled gifts for the Family to Family program today from 4 to 6:30 p.m. or tomorrow from 8:30 a.m. to noon. Volunteers will be ready to help you unload at the landmark entrance. Thank you for helping us help others have a brighter holiday. Again, welcome. We hope that today's service will stimulate your mind, touch your heart, and stir your spirit.
And so we continue with these words from the great romantic poet John Keats. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but will still keep a quiet bower for us and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. Therefore, on every morrow, we are wreathing a flowery band to bind us to the earth, in spite of despondence, of the inhuman dearth of noble natures, of the gloomy days, of all the unhealthy and o'er-darkened ways made for our searching. Yes, in spite of it all, some shape of beauty moves away the pall from our dark spirits. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit for the lighting of our chalice. And if you will please join me in the words of affirmation printed in this evening's program. Each morning we hold out our chalice of being to be filled with the graces of life which abound, air to breathe, food to eat, companions to love, beauty to behold, art to cherish, causes to serve. They come in ritual procession, these gifts of life. Whether we deserve them, we cannot know or say. They are poured out, and ours is the task of holding steady the chalice of being. And now, on this rather gloomy evening, I invite you to turn to your neighbor and exchange with them a warm greeting. Thank you, Pat. Please be seated, and if the children would like to come forward for the message for all ages. And by the way, tomorrow we will be walking in rain with each other. So here's a little opportunity that most of you don't have because you come on Saturdays and we're always in the other building, right? And we don't have a big projector that can put pictures up on the wall, so you're going to want to kind of look to see what the pictures are that are in back of me as I read the story. And this story is entitled The Nightingale. So many years ago, a very important man, he was an emperor, the Emperor of China. He lived in the most beautiful palace in the whole world. And the gardens that surrounded the palace were famous for their flowers and their walkways. But then out beyond this beautiful garden, there was a thick forest that stretched all the way to the sea. And in that forest, there lived a bird, a nightingale, whose song was declared by all who heard it to be the most lovely song that was ever sung. And books were written and they were read worldwide about the palace. And none of those books failed to mention the bird, the nightingale, and its song. But interestingly, the emperor himself had never gone into this dark forest, and he had never heard the nightingale's song. He had not read the books, so he didn't know anything about her. Now, one day, the emperor received a gift from another emperor, the Emperor of Japan, and in the book, the gardens were described in glowing terms as well as the emperor's palace. And the emperor read his book and said, yes, yes, all of this is true. But then the book came to an end, and the last sentence said, the loveliest treasure in all of China is the nightingale who sings in the forest. Well, the Emperor of China called to his servant, who had also never heard about this famous bird. And His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor of China, said, the nightingale must come to my chambers here in my palace and sing for me. So the servant ran all over the palace asking about the bird. Anybody know anything about this nightingale? Well, nobody had heard of the bird either. But finally, the servant entered the kitchen, and there was this poor girl who was bending over the sink, and she was washing all these dirty pots and pans. I know the song of the nightingale, said the girl. I hear it every evening as I walk back to my house through the forest. Come, I'll show you. And so half of the emperor's court noisily followed this kitchen maid as she entered the forest. However, when the sound of the nightingale was heard, everybody grew very, very quiet. They were absolutely silent. No one had ever heard such inspired and beautiful music. And looking around, they tried to glimpse the bird. What kind of a bird? Must be a gorgeous bird that would make all this beautiful music. And the kitchen maid pointed up into a tree to this small, gray, drab bird that was sitting on a branch. I never imagined that the nightingale would look so plain, the servant said. The kitchen maid said very softly to the bird, the emperor would like to hear you sing. It would be my pleasure, said the nightingale, thinking that the emperor would come to her in the forest. But then the servant explained, no, you need to come to the palace. But, said the nightingale, it is best to hear my song here among the trees. But in the end, the bird followed the servant back into the palace to sing for the emperor. But even indoors, the song of the nightingale was so beautiful that tears came to the emperor's eyes. And the sight of the tears made the bird sing even more beautifully, more lovingly. And the emperor said, we need to build a golden perch for this bird to sit on, and I want the nightingale to be with me always. And although the nightingale could no longer be free to fly through the forest, she was humbled by the sight of the emperor's tears and agreed to stay in the palace. Everybody spoke about this remarkable bird, but then one day, a few weeks later, a gift arrived for the Emperor of China. And inside the package, there was a mechanical bird, a mechanical nightingale that was made to look and to sound like the real one. However, this mechanical bird was made out of gold and silver and covered with precious jewels. It could be wound up and made to play a single song over and over again. This mechanical bird is simply marvelous, said everyone in the emperor's court. And the people believed that the mechanical bird was so much more beautiful to behold and even more dependable than the real thing. It played the same song over and over again without ever making a single mistake. Nothing was unexpected in its song. And so the mechanical bird was listened to 33 times a day until the emperor announced that the mechanical bird should now be given a rest. And so then, as the mechanical bird was sitting there silent, the emperor remembered the real nightingale and wanted it to sing again. But the real nightingale was no longer in the palace because no one paid any attention to it. It had flown back into the deep forest. But the emperor's servant said, "The best bird, the mechanical bird, remains here." And the emperor nodded in agreement. And so the mechanical bird sat on a silk pillow, and it was wound up every day. But of course, being a mechanical thing, what do you think happened eventually? It broke. It broke. No one in the palace was able to repair it. So, after a little while, the mechanical bird just sat there on its silken pillow, and then after a while, it was just put away in a cabinet and just taken out every once in a while. Well, a couple of years later, the Emperor of China became very, very ill. And the doctors agreed that he probably wasn't going to get well. And so all day, the emperor just lay in his bed waiting to die. One night, the emperor was very, very feverish, and he was having terrible dreams. And he awoke, and he began to shout for someone to play music that would comfort him. The mechanical bird was brought out and wound up, but all it made was this ugly whirring noise. And the room was still. Tears of frustration came to the emperor's eyes. But then the silence was broken by this beautiful, exquisite song. The nightingale had returned from the heart of the forest to sing for the dying ruler, whose cries he had heard. And the bird sang song after song without any effort whatsoever, and everyone in the room began to cry out of pure joy. And then, dismissing everyone, the emperor looked lovingly at the nightingale and said, thank you, my pride and my foolishness caused me to ignore you, and now it is you who come back to give me comfort. How can I reward you?" "I ask only one thing," said the emperor, or the nightingale rather. "Do not force me to stay here and to live in your palace. Allow me to remain in my home in the forest, and I promise not a day will go by that I do not fly back here and sing to you from a branch outside of the window." "You must only sing when you desire to do so," said the emperor. And so the nightingale flew back into the forest, and it came back day after day, and with each one of its visits, the emperor grew just a little bit stronger. And the doctors scratched their head because they didn't know why the emperor was getting well. But the emperor, he just smiled at them and said he had found these songs in this kind of drab, dun-colored bird. Those songs were for him a feast of the soul that nothing in his palace could possibly equal. So that's the story of the nightingale, and I hope you enjoyed it and hope you have an opportunity at some point to hear those beautiful songs yourself. So we're going to sing you out with a song of our own as you head for your classes. And so, continuing with the theme of beauty, this selection from Lincoln Perry, who is an artist, an American artist who works in a variety of media and has shown throughout the United States. Herbert Hoover, he writes, commissioned John Flanagan to create a silver Washington $quarter coin in 1932 during the depths of the Great Depression. Now, from 1885 to 1890, Flanagan had worked as a studio assistant to America's greatest sculptor, Augustus Saint-Saëns, creator of, among other things, the monument to General Sherman in New York City and the memorial to Robert Gould Shaw on Boston Commons. Flanagan's apprenticeship served him well to judge by the quality of his quarter. Look at this coin, this small coin, as a tondo. That is, a circular work of art. And then notice how comfortable old George is in this round setting. This tiny object is a jewel to be held lovingly in one's hand. And now look very carefully at a more recent redesigned quarter. The one I'm holding is from 2004. On this coin, George resembles a fallen souffle. His head, a series of unrelated marks fighting with each other with no sense of harmony. He has no volume, no presence, and certainly no potential psychology. Now, I can sympathize with the artist's plight, being told to cram in all those extra words on the face of the coin. Our new coins add $quarter and the United States of America to In God We Trust, Liberty, and the year of issue. But that doesn't excuse or explain that horrible head, that truly grotesque coin. Now, turn each coin over. Old George's accompanying eagle is grand, its full chest logically placed in the center, its wings nicely echoing its curved cage. Now, my new quarter from 2004 happens to represent the state of Florida, with a sailing ship and some palm trees and a space shuttle all floating free of each other. The images fill their circle indifferently, with no real poetry of call and response. They remind me of cheap carnival tokens. Now, I am not a numismatist, but I like to think that I am sensitive to beautiful things and that my distress over our new coins is far more than pique and pickiness. In a sense, we are perhaps unknowingly making our civilization more callous, more disembodied, less about contemplation than instant gratification. Perhaps these little chunks of metal that we carry in our pockets, soon to be replaced by newer versions or by chips embedded in our hands, perhaps those little pieces of metal could remind us of a choice that we can make, a choice between two approaches in life, if only we would pay attention. And the second, a poem by Mary Oliver entitled Singapore. In Singapore, in the airport, a darkness ripped from my eyes. In the woman's restroom, one compartment stood open. A woman knelt there, washing something in a white bowl. Disgust argued in my stomach, and I felt in my pocket for my ticket. A poem should always have birds in it. Kingfishers, say, with their bold eyes and gaudy wings. Rivers are pleasant, and of course, trees. A waterfall, and if that's not possible, a fountain rising and falling. A person wants to stand in a happy place in a poem. When the woman turned, I could not answer her face. Her beauty and her embarrassment struggled together, and neither could win. She smiled, and I smiled. What kind of nonsense is this? Everybody needs a job. Yes, a person wants to stand in a happy place in a poem. But first we must watch her as she stares down at her labor, which is dull enough. She's washing the top of airport ashtrays as big as hubcaps with a blue rag. Her small hands turn the metals, scrubbing and rinsing. She does not work slowly nor quickly, like a river. Her dark hair is like the wings of a bird. I don't doubt for a moment that she loves her life, and I want her to rise up from the crust and the slop and to fly down the river. This probably won't happen, but maybe it will. As if the world was only pain and logic, who would want it? Of course it isn't, and neither do I mean anything miraculous, but only the light that can shine out of a life. I mean the way she unfolded and refolded that blue cloth, the way her smile was only for my sake. I mean the way this poem is filled with trees and with birds. Thank you, Eva and Dan. As I was leaving the meeting house just the other afternoon, the sun had slipped below the horizon and the sky was awash with color. Wispy red and orange clouds stood out against a fading azure field as I paused to admire the spectacle that is rather unusual for this time of year. And although I did still have responsibilities to attend to, the hunger for beauty, so characteristic of our species, prevailed for those few precious moments. As Howard Gardner notes, the pursuit of experiences that are beautiful constitutes a crucial part of life, particularly when one's basic needs have been satisfied. But beauty's power to inspire can be felt even in conditions of extreme deprivation, even when one teeters on the edge of existence. Viktor Frankl survived the rigors of a Nazi concentration camp, and for him and his fellow prisoners, just staying alive was an all-consuming task. But one evening, Frankl recalled, when we were already resting on the floor of our hut, dead tired, soup bowls in our hands, a fellow prisoner rushed in and asked us to run to the assembly grounds and to see the wonderful sunset. Standing outside, we saw sinister clouds glowing in the west, and the whole sky was alive with color. The desolate gray mud huts provided a sharp contrast, while the puddles on the muddy ground reflected that glowing sky. And then after a few moments of moving silence, one prisoner said to another, "How beautiful the world could be." Experiences like these can, in fact, help any of us to get through a difficult day. An encounter with beauty can compensate for disappointments and hardships that would otherwise leave us spiritless and despondent. And this is true for auditory as well as visual beauty. The reclusive philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein confided to one of his few friends that at one time, the slow movement of Brahms' Third Quartet had pulled him back from the brink of suicide. Here in the West, beauty has generally been highly esteemed. In the Platonic tradition, beauty, together with truth and goodness, has enjoyed a transcendent status, life's summum bonum. Truth, goodness, and beauty. These are the ultimate ends, the pursuit of which makes life meaningful, whose acquisition renders life complete. And moreover, these three ideals are intertwined. What is true is also beautiful. What is beautiful must of necessity be good. Recall these memorable lines from Emily Dickinson. "I died for beauty, but was scarce adjusted in the tomb when one who died for truth was lain in an adjoining room. He questioned softly why I failed. For beauty, I replied, and I for truth. The two are one. We brethren are," he said. Now, the ancients were quite clear about what constituted beauty. Whether the object of consideration was a temple, a statue, a coin, an amphora, or the human form itself, it had to possess a certain symmetry and balance and proportionality. An artist like Lincoln Perry still uses standards similar to these in gauging the beauty of an artifact, a $quarter piece. And a structure like our own meeting house fulfills these same standards in many respects. And in addition, certain sights and sounds seem to have near universal approval as beautiful. The song of a nightingale, or the sight of a colorful sunset. But that hardly means that we have reached an absolute consensus about beauty, and any given era may recognize beauty where a previous or a later one clearly did not. And so today, the works of the great Impressionist painters fetch astronomical prices. But 19th century critics dismissed those same paintings as amateurish and ugly. During his lifetime, Vincent van Gogh didn't sell a single painting. And of those paintings of his that he gave away, many were simply discarded. The arts, Howard Gardner writes, proceed along unpredictable historical, cultural, and individual tracks. We can marvel at works of art, but we will never be able to come up with an algorithm that explains their meaning and accounts for their appeal. Nor are beauty, truth, and goodness as closely related to one another as philosophers and artists have long insisted. Certain expressions of beauty are notoriously deceptive. Take glamour, for instance. We are drawn to and we admire glamorous stars of the stage and screen. But what attracts us is often a beauty that is quite literally skin deep. You know, etymologically, Our English word glamour derives from a French word that originally meant enchantment, to be placed under a spell. Glamour does not exist in and of itself, Jenny Diskey writes. It consists of yearning and of lies. Similarly, the word charming is often used to describe a beautiful and winsome personality. Those who possess this attribute, charm, have a talent for making other people feel good. Such people are positive, upbeat, engaging, well-spoken. But they aren't always trustworthy, and they aren't always well-intentioned. He could charm the hind legs off a donkey, a familiar saying admonishes. Charmers know that they can influence other people and gain their confidence, but charm is not a reliable indicator of either truth or goodness. As Benjamin Schwartz warns, the line between charmer and sociopath is very fine indeed. Charm, he says, is charming. Just don't be charmed by it. These observations about glamour and charm are consistent with what the late Unitarian Universalist minister Forrester Church had to say about the devil. It is a mistake, Forrester Church argued, to think of the devil as a repulsive being, as many medieval commentators once did. The devil's trademark is not evil dressed as evil, Church writes, but evil dressed as good. If we were to sketch the devil's nature and personality, he continues, he is beautiful, he is proud, he is brilliant, he is clever in the ways of the world, and he is a liar. The habit of associating ugliness with evil and beauty with goodness can leave us exposed, vulnerable to exploitation and seduction by maleficent forces. Forrest Church did not harbor a literal belief in Satan. The latter, Satan, served as a legendary and literary stand-in for especially diabolical human beings, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi henchmen, for instance. Many of you know that Hitler was originally trained as an artist, and he was, as Martin Filler points out, fully aware of the propagandistic power of the arts. And so colorful torchlit choreography, grand architecture, stirring music, arresting poster art, handsome uniforms, all of these things factored into the Nazis' rise to absolute power. They did much, Filler writes, to support authoritarian might through the consistent artistic projection of strength, order, and beauty. The point is, as edifying and elevating as beauty might be, we must remember that it isn't always trustworthy and it isn't always true. On the other hand, because something strikes us as ugly, we should not treat it with contempt. To emphasize only the beautiful seems to me like a mathematical system that concentrates only with positive numbers, the abstract artist Paul Klee once declared. And indeed, by linking beauty with truth and goodness, we end up establishing something like a false dichotomy, which then causes us to devalue certain aspects of life a priori. If the ugly is devoid of truth and goodness, why should we bother with it at all? The concept of beauty is itself based on a hierarchy that labels some things as undeniably beautiful and others as irretrievably ugly, the fine arts scholar Laurie Friedrich says. Now, a fair amount of recent art and music pushes back against our traditional assessments. Violating previous canons of taste, contemporary art deliberately presents itself many times as unbeautiful or as discordant. To be sure, traditional notions of beauty still prevail, but Howard Gardner points out that more physical and psychic space is open in today's world to works and experiences that are better characterized not as beautiful, but as interesting, sometimes even awful, but yet memorable in their mode of presentation and inviting further exploration. As an example, writing last August about his native land, the Indian novelist Atish Tasir commented on the illusory image that he and many other Indians retain of their country. India is a beautiful land, he and his fellow Indians will tell themselves repeatedly. But then Taseer says that any honest appraisal of India would conclude just the opposite. Yes, there are splashes of beauty, but today in India, ugliness prevails. Our environmental problems are among the greatest in the world, he laments, and abject poverty is everywhere. And now, as a writer, Taseer has found it very challenging to address the ugliness of this place that he cares about so deeply. Like Mary Oliver, his initial impulse is to focus only on the beautiful, the India of his imagination. But he says, the greatest aesthetic discovery of my life has been to see India's ugliness and then to find a way to write about it, to find a lexicon for ugliness. Now, in the West, we too are biased in beauty's favor. However, Western literature includes a number of cautionary tales that cut against the grain. The Princess and the Frog, Beauty and the Beast, and in the Arthurian legends, the story of gallant Sir Gawain and his liaison with the repugnant Dame Ragnell. And in each of these fairy tales, that which is initially perceived as repellent shelters an intrinsic beauty that will remain hidden until its bearer is seen and accepted in his or her wholeness. As Treb Johnson puts it, daring to touch the unbeautiful, we realize that not only are we not dragged down into something loathsome, but that just the opposite occurs. We feel empowered, joyous, connected with the other. To give beauty to another person, to a group of people, even to a damaged place on the earth, is to move past our fear and our revulsion that keeps us separated from life itself. And Treb Johnson then goes on to describe certain activities that were undertaken in conjunction with the 2010 Global Earth Exchange. As part of this mass movement, teams of people throughout the planet visited areas that had been made ugly by clear-cutting, mining, pollution, and other indiscriminate forms of industrial activity. And after going to these areas and surveying them, taking it all in, assimilating the ugliness of these places, the team members would then engage in small acts of beauty. And one such team in Great Britain visited a dump in a forlorn industrial park. There was no evidence whatsoever of plant or animal life, just felt absolutely dead. After an hour or so of contemplation in this desolate scene, the men and women on the team began to gather bits and pieces of trash, and out of them they made a sculpture. And then as the late afternoon shadows lengthened, no one wanted to leave. After spending time in such an intimate way, Lucy Hinton later wrote, it felt as though we had given a part of ourselves to the place, and it to us. And by the time we did leave, she continues, we felt like pioneers who had begun the process of breaking an invisible barrier that until now had held this wounded place in some kind of soulless imprisonment. We dreamed of returning, breaking up the baked hard topsoil so that seeds could be planted, that they could emerge, and the birds and the color might return to this place once more. If it is true that philosophy and religion have historically advanced an aesthetic of the beautiful, well, yes, Christian iconography, it habitually and invariably presents Jesus as handsome. It presents the Virgin Mary as comely. But despite this tradition, what we need to remember is that Jesus himself was drawn not just to the beautiful. He was drawn to lepers, persons with disabilities, those who were considered unclean and untouchable by polite society. Because Jesus could recognize an inner beauty that eluded the myopic religious establishment. Likewise, Buddhist statuary is meant to draw the subject in with its serene beauty. Buddhism, Freihof Schwann writes, acknowledges the existential power of beauty and uses harmony and symmetry of form as a skillful means to strengthen the individual's aspiration and to enhance his or her spiritual practice. But Buddhism doesn't stop there, because it warns of fixed views in our habits of thinking and judgment. And in order to obtain a clear and accurate view of reality, we must be alert to the biases that color our outlook. As Gina Sharp, founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Manhattan, puts it, the basis of a beautiful life is a beautiful mind, and beauty comes from a mind that is capable of seeing things just as they are in the moment and being able to repose in that. The state of mind that we are calling beautiful is not possible if we are busy excluding. Joyce Kornblatt is an Australian Buddhist teacher, and she speaks in a similar vein of the wilderness mind that recognizes change as the only constant. So oriented, wilderness mind is able to appreciate the ephemeral beauty in things as they are aging or as they are decaying. It is this turning toward rather than away from impermanence which then fosters a closer and more honest relationship with the world and with each other, Kornblatt suggests. And that's not always an easy thing to do. It can be a scary thing to do, because we are culturally conditioned to turn away from and to reject the old, the damaged, the misshapen. And Kornblatt says that she herself still suffers from certain lapses, as when her daughter's Raggedy Ann doll, given to her in infancy, had become threadbare, its facial features practically worn away. And so one day Kornblatt suggested to her daughter, "Isn't it just about time we got you a new Raggedy Ann?" The youngster was aghast, scolded her mother. "If I had an accident and my face got ruined, would you get a new child?" "No," she said, "I love Raggedy Ann just as she is." "My child's wisdom humbled me," Kornblatt wrote. What aversions could withstand such clear-eyed devotion to the truth of how things really are? So yes, beauty does lie in the eye of the beholder. But as this little girl knew, at a more profound level, and in the most significant sense, its true home is in the soul of the beholder. Blessed be, and amen. And now I would invite you to join together in the giving and the receiving of our offering. And as you will note, our offering this evening and throughout the weekend will be shared with Briar Patch Youth Services. It does important work for young people in our community. Please be generous. we have is number 330. Please be seated for the benediction of the postlude. And so we close with these words from the Navajo tradition. In beauty may I walk, all day long may I walk, through the returning seasons may I walk. Beautiful will I possess again, beautifully birds, beautifully joyous birds. On a trail marked with pollen may I walk, with grasshoppers about my feet may I walk, with dew about my feet may I walk, with beauty may I walk. With beauty before me may I walk, with beauty behind me may I walk, with beauty above me may I walk, and with beauty around me may I walk. In old age, wandering on a trail of beauty, lively may I walk. In old age, wandering on a trail of beauty, living again may I walk. It is finished in beauty. It is finished in beauty.